Item number 2 is a presentation by AECOM summarizing the Clark Street and Main Street traffic study. If you recall, a while back we were asked to look at making those roads two-way again. And I will turn it over to you guys to let us know what's going on.
Just, I guess, a brief introduction before Jeff begins. Jeff Sandberg here for the AECOM, also part of the Business 51 plan. You know, part of this otherwise came about because we were looking at Business 51 potential changes and want to know how any impact of this could otherwise work with that or how it may not work with that. So it seems like the timing was otherwise appropriate to do that. Since then, what's otherwise come about as well is all the bill funding and stuff, the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. One of those new things that's come out, never before, its new pilot program is a Reconnecting Communities pilot program, which is something that we otherwise have authorized the Community Development Office, and I don't know, maybe Director Karnowski to speak more of it if anyone has questions or see him about it, that the application is due later this week. And this is the work that otherwise is the base, the foundation of what that is, to see how things otherwise work. This isn't the end-all be-all of what it is, needs to be done there, but that grant, those grant dollars, if we were fortunate to get that, would then help us take this to the next level. But this is what that otherwise is, so I thought, especially timing-wise, before we submit that grant, it'd be nice that everybody hear a little bit of what this is. The timing is coming along very well, that we have this at the same time as we're applying for that. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to kind of go over that.
No, we're not.
Now I'm turning it over to Jeff. All right, then I'll talk a little bit longer.
Well, you know.
So for anyone on the board, I did have some handouts. There's some extra ones on the side if anyone wants to. There's an executive summary from the report as well as some of the concept drawings that Jeff will be going into. So if you wanted to take notes or do whatever, I think what you have here won't mimic all the slides, but I think all the information that will be presented will be found in this handout if you're interested.
Thank you all for having me here today to talk about the Clark Street and Main Street traffic study that we just finished up recently. The purpose of this study was to take a look at taking some of the one-way streets in the downtown area and turning them into two-way streets and seeing if that was feasible and what sort of accommodations we might have to make in order to make that happen. So you can go to the next slide. So on this slide, you'll see the pink routes. These are the routes that were looked at: Main Street, Clark Street, sections of Centerpoint Drive, and also Water Street, kind of right in the downtown area, were all taken a look at. And the study had three main objectives. It was to look at ways to improve mobility, provide easier access to businesses in the downtown area, and to improve the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. You can go to the next slide. So just to kind of set the expectations on what the study is, this is a traffic-based feasibility study related to removing those one-way streets, turning them into two-way streets. This is not a comprehensive evaluation of all the impacts that could be involved with this type of project. If the city decides to move forward with a project to pursue this, then that will be addressed further down the road. So we took a look at three different alternatives for the study. Alternative one, we looked at what if we set up Clark Street in such a way that it's designed to handle the majority of that traffic that comes through the downtown area. Main Street would still be a two-way street, but it would be more of a kind of a minor side street. Alternative two, we took a look at what would happen if the majority of westbound traffic stayed on Main Street, while the majority of eastbound traffic stayed on Clark Street. But both of those streets were still converted to two-way streets. And then alternative three, we looked at what if we kept the one-way streets as is, but we reduced them from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction. The footnote down there says that alternative 3 does not meet the purpose of the study, those 3 objectives that I pointed to start, but it was just used as a point of comparison. So next slide. So I'm going to go into the results of the analysis. When we talk about traffic studies and analysis, we usually talk in terms of level of service, which is a measure of average delay that's experienced. So it's given a letter grade, much like in grade school. Level service A means very little delay. Level service F means lots of delay. So what you're seeing here is the no build from future year 2047, which means the existing roads the way they are, but with future traffic. And you can see there's not too many issues out there. we have you'll see a couple of red arrows. Those indicate individual movements where the level of service was deficient. But a lot of times those are things that can be addressed with minor changes, or sometimes it's just something that we will accept because the impacts would be quite great to improve upon that. So next slide. So getting into the results for alternative 1, this is where Clark Street kind of acts as the primary route. So I wanted to step back too and mention that we in order to model these as two-way streets, we had to make some assumptions on where traffic is going to be going. So what we're calling here the baseline scenario, that was kind of our best guess as to where traffic would be going. But we also recognize that this is not a perfect science. So we wanted to take a look at what if less traffic ended up on Clark Street than we anticipated, and what if more traffic ended up on Clark Street than we anticipated. So on the bottom, you see those callouts where we mentioned the low scenario and the high scenario. That's kind of what that's referring to, just to indicate that we did take a look at those different options. But no matter which option we look at here for alternative 1, you see a lot of red and a lot of red arrows on the board. So this had quite a few deficiencies compared to the no-build alternative. So you go to, yep. So next up we have alternative 2. This looks not as bad as alternative 1, but we still have quite a few red arrows and a couple of partially filled red circles, which indicates we have some level of service and delay deficiencies with this alternative as well. This was the one where we assumed westbound traffic would stay on Main Street, eastbound traffic would stay on Clark Street. Next slide. So for alternative 3, this was where we reduced all these one-way roads to a single lane in each direction. And you can see it's not too much different from the no-build scenario. There are still some local turning movement deficiencies here, but again, probably nothing that couldn't be worked around. So where does that leave us? For the 3 alternatives we evaluated, unfortunately, alternatives 1 and 2 were not feasible due to deficient level of service, and alternative 3, even though the level of service looks okay, it doesn't really meet the goals of what we were trying to accomplish. So we moved on and decided to take a look at additional alternatives. And what we did was, if you notice from the first couple alternatives, the deficiencies seem to be centered around Division Street and Michigan Avenue. So we realized that, well, maybe we can take a look at an alternative where we make some of these two-way street improvements to the west of Division Street. So we looked at ways of doing that, and the first thing we had to figure out was how do we get that westbound Main Street traffic down to Clark Street. So we looked at 3 different options of doing that. You'll see the orange arrows is Rogers Street, that's one option. The red arrows is Church Street, that's another option. And then the blue arrow is Smith Street, and that's actually an extension of Smith Street. So the blue arrows are not actually there today. And so we took a look at those, and we actually determined that Smith Street was the preferred alternative. Rogers Street and Church Street, well, Rogers Street is a residential street. Church Street has more commercial access to it. But in order to make this cutover, we would have to take some parking away, and we have to convert it to a one-way street. And those things were not desired for those streets. In addition, this new street's going to have to accommodate trucks as they take that 1 block jog from Main Street over to Clark Street. Next slide. So this is what that alternative 4 ended up looking like. The pink roads are one-way streets that would remain as they are today. The purple streets are roads that we would be able to convert from one-way to two-way streets. The dashed pink line is the removal of Center Point Drive, that section where it kind of makes a northwesterly cut from Main Street up to Briggs Street. So one of the side effects of this project is we would be able to remove that street and replace it with a downtown grid system. So as far as the one-way streets on Main Street and Clark Street, it would work either way if it remained as is today with 2-lane streets in each direction, or if the city wanted to go to a one-lane street in each direction. A couple other things to point out here. Water Street, we could reduce the width of that road pretty drastically, considering the reduction in traffic, or yeah, the reduction in volume. And then Water Street also would have a direct connection up to 2nd Street, kind of on the upper left side of that graphic there. And we would be able to cul-de-sac 1st Street so that we would get rid of that. Right now, it kind of that's the transition from two-lane or two-way to one-way streets. All right, next slide. So yeah, Scott gave you all the handouts here. So feel free to look through those and let me know if you have any questions. But just to kind of finish up here, this alternative 4 kind of checks those main 3 boxes of improved mobility. We have easier access to downtown businesses and also improving the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And a side benefit too is this option will free up quite a bit of land for the city to either redevelop or to turn into green space or whatever the city would like to do with it. The net effect is, you can see the number there, it's about 2.4 acres of land that would be freed up by making these changes. So with that, I think that's the last slide. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
So through traffic, people coming from the east going to the west, across the bridge to Mead Park to Junction City, wherever it happens to be. By removing that section of center point, you're now forcing quite a few turns. Doesn't that create more problems?
So the turns would happen on that new stretch of Smith Street, the extension. And so the way that would be your transition point from two-way Clark to the west to one-way Clark to the east.
But if people aren't aware of that and they miss that Smith Street turn, that's going to take them right down Main Street.
It would. So we would have to be very clear about that with the signing.
Yeah, everybody looks at signs.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? But up at the lectern, please. We need microphones for everybody.
Just a quick question. Was any consideration given to making Church and Strong's two-way as opposed to one-way?
So those 2 streets weren't explicitly included in the study. I think that with Strong's and Church, they're both one-way streets to the south. So I think that would certainly be a possibility. But there might be a little more analysis needed to, analyze the impacts of, do we want to just make that change in the downtown area, and does that affect how those 2 one-way streets operate down to the south as well?
Okay. Alder Kiemer?
Oh, sure. I guess this is a question for both Mr. Sandberg and Director Badoon, but I guess could you discuss what kind of right-of-way acquisition would need to happen for that extension of Smith Street? And then I guess just a comment, this sort of, I go to the post office quite a bit, and I actually live not far from here, and I see a number of people kind of from that section of Main Street cut through this Associated Bank parking lot all the time because they want to turn around and go, down Clark Street out of town. And so in some ways this sort of strikes me as a desirability path, the way you'll notice people cutting corners, and treading on the grass and making a shortcut. So I guess I see human behavior kind of doing this already in a less, what's the word? Approved way.
It's true. If it's not convenient, people will find a different way to get there.
So yeah, right away. Yeah.
So the first question, yes, right away.
Yeah.
And I know we kind of, Jeff, can you speak to exactly what it, because it's really just, it's within that parking lot. So we wouldn't have to purchase a home. So it's unlike other alternatives, which potentially could mean widening the right of way, purchasing homes. This was really just the parking area. I think the biggest issue would be, would be the relocation of the generator if arranged or however happens there, because it would be within this rate. But I don't know. I think you have it on your list as far as how much land that would actually be.
The last line item in the table that's on the screen now says Smith Street Extension. 0.48 acres, so about a half acre roughly is what would be required. And as Scott mentioned, it would be primarily a parking lot area, but there is a generator and maybe some other utilities.
There's 2 generators there for sure.
Yeah, for the associated bank building. So that would have to be worked out with the property owner.
All right, follow up?
Oh.
No,
that
we're
was
good?
Yeah.
Alderperson Shore.
Thanks. David Shore, Alderperson for District 2. This is very helpful. Thanks for doing it. I'm glad that you looked at Alternative 4 because I think that some of the things that have been on my mind about this area are very much focused in that downtown portion. I mean, when you talk about access to businesses, my sense is that that's very much an alive concern on that stretch of Clark Street. At least, well, one of the business owners that I've talked to about this issue of switching to two-way was very eager to see it happen. And then over on Centerpoint, it's more of a kind of the direction things are going and what we're trying to do. So that's great. Those are the two, I think, the right two places for access to businesses. And then that stretch of Water Street, as great as the bicycle infrastructure project that we did is, and it is, I know there's concern, including the constituent who lives in my house with me, that's not the best part of the infrastructure, that Water Street place, which, as we've talked about before also, is really important in terms of that relationship between downtown and the park and the waterfront. Thanks.
Okay. We got a few people standing up here. Director Konoski, did you have comments?
I can wait.
Director or Alderperson Dalton? You're just standing for the heck of it. Okay. President Johnson, you're up. I saw him standing there. I thought they were waiting to speak. I'm sorry.
Standing is the new healthy thing to do. So sitting was like smoking a pack of cigarettes, they say.
Oh, you should stop sitting.
I should. I should. Gave up cigarettes a long time ago. First, thank you. I was one of the people who had asked for this because I couldn't visualize what would happen with a two-way, because I remember a long time ago, two-way downtown.
When we had the grid.
Yeah, and so this reminds me a bit of, everyone talks, just like if it could be like it was before, it's kind of like it was before. The grid system downtown is exactly what I remember before Centerpoint went through. So again, my appreciation to the director and to AECOM. This helps me visualize it, and I appreciate the work that went into it. I don't know what the exact solution is, but this is a much better, it's a great document, set of documents that'll help us in decision making. So that's my only comment. Again, it reminds me of growing up when it was a grid system. So.
You're up now? Okay.
Sure, yeah, whatever works.
Melissa, don't start smoking.
No.
I'll try to quit.
It's harder to work on a laptop if you're standing. Director.
Okay. So I think there's a few things in this plan that from future development and the urban planning aspect that the Community Development Department is exceptionally excited about. Probably most notably reducing the right-of-way on Long Water Street between the bridge and the First Street Centerpoint intersection. That allows us to, in the future, as we redevelop parking lots or as the bank parcel becomes redeveloped, to strategically push buildings closer to the street, creating that sense of downtown, framing in the street, while allowing the back end or the water side the opportunity to remain public and open and continue to be green space. Whereas right now, if we were to do this plan in 2047, which I hope to be about retired by then, so I'd like to see this before then, you would have some pretty exceptional green space between the buildings and the road right-of-way. And from a framing of the street, feeling that downtown-esque that I think we're really trying to go for in future development would probably be counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve. Additionally, the green space at Center Point Drive area, there was some question. Last Friday, Chris Claysmith from my office and I did go downtown. We met with a number of businesses and showed them this plan just to get kind of that preliminary feedback, and it was all really positive. And one of the questions was, well, what happens to that right-of-way? And there's some pretty significant infrastructure, including Moses Creek stormwater diversion that goes down Center Point, underneath Rogers, through Trinity Lutheran, and underneath the dam. And so in order for us to identify that for redevelopment, it would take some pretty significant investment in the infrastructure, not to mention the water utility and the sewer utilities as well. So the general concept would be maybe you put a pathway through there and it becomes a linear park. So now, instead of, if you want to get to the waterfront, instead of staying on the road or instead of crisscrossing through it, you could take that to Center Point, which would probably have a much more comfortable pedestrian bicycle feel to get to Piffner Park, as an example. So there's a lot of really good things that come out of this plan. Of course, the Smith Street right-of-way acquisition and the relocation of the 2 generators and what I believe to be the smoke hut for Associated Bank is going to be a cost that we're going to have to consider. But I think between what AECOM has put together, conversations with Director Badoon, this is a really good plan that we know has worked historically. This is the same grid system that was in the downtown area prior to 1980. And so that's something to consider as well, that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to go back to a time that, we didn't have to have this giant concrete moat around our downtown. So we have been reaching out to the businesses. We have been getting that preliminary feedback, but from the community development aspect, there's a lot of really good potential here, and I'm really excited to see this hopefully come to fruition prior to 2047. So I'll keep saying that. I think I'd said in my interview a few years ago that I'd like to see the 2 ways addressed before I retire. So come on, guys, we can do it.
Well, they're addressed.
They're addressed.
We've just addressed them. Yeah. There's like, I know there's 1055. There's addresses all over the place.
All over the place, yeah.
And thank you, Director. The Downtown Point Alliance actually has a meeting on Wednesday, and I'll bring this there to get some feedback. The one thing that I would point out is we can take that narrowing of Water Street and do that without making any improvements really to what we have currently, correct? We could acquire that green space on the west end of Water Street without having to actually even acquire Smith Street or do any of the traffic improvements. We could do that today because we don't use it.
To a certain degree, yes. So this plan, one of the details that might not be apparent is at Water Street and Crosby Avenue. This plan made the assumption there would just be a 2-way stop control intersection there, whereas today there's a traffic signal. So you do need maybe a little bit more width there to accommodate left turn lanes and what else you would need for the traffic signal, but you could certainly shrink it down to some degree today.
Honestly, if you look at our master plan, and I assume you did when you were looking at this design, Crosby, we have the intention of closing off the street at some point. So that wouldn't be as big a deal if we do that. Then the downside, of course, and Ryan's right, there's a lot of good things with this. The downside is we lose the ability to redevelop any of that Center Point property if we don't redivert everything that we put under there in the 80s. But I appreciate this information because it's going to help all of us. Any last questions? Yes. Oh, missed it. Sorry.
That's all right. Trying to understand all this, I think it's a good idea. I do want to study it some more. I see that. I do see a few things that are going to end up being very much of a nightmare. To me, all the turns, when you push everything into the 2-lane, you're still going to have trucks going through there. And that's going to cause a real havoc. But then the biggest thing is, we say we're trying to be pedestrian, biker, all this other friendly. We have housing projects and we have parking for our library and everything else to the south of that road. and now you're putting more people that are gonna have to cross, and you're putting double the traffic on this road. That's my concern.
Please. All valid points, and we're still in the infancy of looking at all of this. So take note, so we don't have to worry about a big show of people who never heard about this when we go to a 30% design. This is the time we want to talk about it, now. Try and get your concerns out in the open, now. Alder Christensen, go ahead.
I think my impression is that the westbound traffic would be turning south on that new stretch of Smith and wouldn't be going down Main Street typically. So I don't think...
Unless they need a delivery down Main Street, which many of the businesses already do.
Which then they're already doing it, but I don't know that there'll be additional. And even if they missed the new Smith turn, they could still go down Church. Or is that Strong's?
Strong's.
Strong's. So I don't think they'll be going in. Hopefully, I don't see an increase of traffic in front of the library, I hope.
You always have a certain amount of truck traffic that runs the roads.
No, he's talking about the south end of the library,
Oh, I see.
where you're making it two-way, effectively putting twice as many
Gotcha.
motorists on there.
On that south side.
Yeah, trucks are always going to be a problem because the streets are narrow and makes turns difficult. Should watch the cameras sometime on the square. Okay, this information will be put up on our website as soon as we are able. Again, anybody watching this, listening at home, if you have questions, comments, get them to your alderperson, get them to my office, get them to the director, and we will move forward from there.
Check, 1, 2.
Oh, Trevor.
We'll ask a question.
I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, 2 questions for AECOM. One is, it looks like the traffic study didn't include level of service for people walking or people biking. So the first question is, why wasn't that level of service included for those folks that already use
Actually,
the street?
it's right on the screen, Trevor.
The level of service for people that walk and bike. And the second, I'm talking about traffic, which is cars and trucks.
Improved bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead.
And the second question is the cul-de-sac projected for the termination of First Street. Why is that a good idea, or why is that proposed? Thanks.
Sure. So to answer the first question, you're correct. We did not look at level of service for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. This study had a very limited scope. It was a traffic-based feasibility study. So we didn't dive into all the impacts apart from, is this something that could work from a traffic standpoint? For your second question about the cul-de-sac on First Street, so the purpose of that cul-de-sac was to kind of separate out the way Water Street connects to Second Street. Right now it splits into a northbound and a southbound road, and with Water Street becoming a two-way road all the way up to Portage Street, we had that route along Second Street, and so there was really no need for that connection to First Street. There are a couple businesses on First Street that would still need access, and they would still have access, but that connection to Water Street would be removed.
Alrighty, again, this will be posted up on our website. Okay, go ahead.
Kind of on that same note, was any consideration given to a one-lane roundabout at that intersection of First and where First and Second, and where that comes, that intersection we were just referring to?
Up in this area, Alderman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Roundabout was not considered there. In fact, we did take a look at the traffic volumes and determined that we would be okay with just a two-way stop control intersection there. Not to say you couldn't put a roundabout there, but usually we try to put roundabouts in places where traffic is at least high enough to warrant like a four-way stop or a traffic signal. So that's certainly something that could be considered, but not necessary.